The great chamber of the Galactic Council had stood for 12,000 years. Its walls were made of a strange metal that changed color with the mood of those inside. Today, the walls glowed a deep angry red. 17 species sat in a massive curved room, each one older than humanity by millions of years. They had built empires when humans were still living in caves. They had conquered star systems when humans were learning to make fire. And now, they were very, very angry. High Arbiter stood at the center of the chamber. He was tall, almost 8 feet, with gray skin that looked like stone and eyes that burned like yellow flames. His species, had ruled the council for 3,000 years. No one questioned them. No one dared. Had personally overseen the submission of 6 younger species. He knew how to break the will of entire civilizations. He knew how to make them beg. "The humans have refused our demands," he announced. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. "They will not surrender their outer colonies. They will not pay tribute. They have told us, and I quote their exact words, to mind our own business." A gasp went through the assembled delegates. The representative, a massive creature covered in thick scales and natural armor, slammed his fist on his console. "This is an insult to everything we stand for. These creatures have existed for barely a moment in cosmic time. Who do they think they are?" Raised his hand for silence. "I have consulted with our military advisors. I have spoken with our intelligence services. The humans possess technology that is surprisingly advanced, but they are still young. They are still weak. They have never faced a true galactic power." He paused and looked around the room at the faces of beings who had crushed countless civilizations beneath their feet. "I propose we teach them what happens to those who defy the council. I propose total war." The vote was unanimous. Every species agreed. The humans would learn their place, or they would be erased from the galaxy entirely. The declaration of war was transmitted across every frequency that humanity used. It was sent to every station, every colony, every ship. The message was clear and simple: surrender everything or face complete destruction. The council expected the humans to panic. They expected riots in the streets. They expected desperate leaders begging for mercy. What they got was something very different. On Earth, it was a Tuesday morning. Secretary of Defense was in her office, drinking her 3rd cup of coffee and reviewing budget reports. She was a woman in her early 60s with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many crises to count. When her aide rushed in with news of the alien transmission, she listened carefully, nodded once, and took another sip of her coffee. "So they want a war," she said calmly. "Yes, ma'am. They're threatening to destroy all of human civilization." Thought about this for a moment. She had dealt with threats before. During her career, she had faced terrorist attacks, nuclear standoffs, and 3 separate attempts to hack the global power grid. An alien council throwing a tantrum because humans wouldn't give them free stuff was, in her view, just another Tuesday. "Send them a response," she said. 3 words acknowledged good luck. Her aide stared at her. "That's it. They're threatening to wipe us out. And we've been threatening to wipe ourselves out for centuries. We're still here." She turned back to her budget reports. "Let me know when they actually do something. I have a meeting at noon." Across human space, the reaction was similar. News channels covered the story for about an hour before moving on to a celebrity scandal that people found more interesting. Social media was briefly filled with jokes and memes about the alien council. Someone created a video game where players could fight against the. It became moderately popular for a few weeks. The stock market dipped slightly, then recovered by the end of the day. Restaurants stayed open. Schools held classes. People went to work, complained about traffic, and argued about sports. A war that was supposed to bring humanity to its knees had barely made them look up from their phones. On the diplomatic vessel Gentle Understanding, Arbiter watched the human response with growing confusion. His tactical advisor, a young named, ran the analysis 3 times to make sure there was no error. "They received our transmission," confirmed. Every human settlement has acknowledged it, but there is no panic, no evacuation orders, no military mobilization beyond standard readiness levels. That is impossible, said. We have just declared war on their entire species. We have threatened to destroy everything they have built. How can they not care? Had no answer. In his training, he had studied the psychology of dozens of species. He knew how fear worked. He knew how to exploit it. But the humans were not behaving according to any pattern he recognized. Perhaps, he suggested carefully, they do not believe we are serious. Then we will show them we are serious. Turn to his communications officer. Contact. Tell him to assemble the first strike fleet, 800 of our finest vessels. We will crush their outer colonies and see if they still refuse to care when their people are dying. The order was sent. Across the galaxy, ships began to move. Weapons were charged. Soldiers prepared for battle. The greatest military force the Council had ever assembled was about to descend on humanity like a hammer from the heavens. And on Earth, finished her coffee, attended her noon meeting, and went home at a reasonable hour. She made dinner for her husband, watched a cooking show, and went to bed early. Tomorrow would probably be busier, she thought, but there was no point in losing sleep over things she could not control tonight. In her experience, panic never solved anything. The military would handle whatever came. That was what they were trained for. That was what they were good at. And if the aliens wanted to learn that lesson the hard way, well, that was their choice. She fell asleep within minutes, dreaming of nothing in particular. The galaxy had just declared war on humanity, and humanity, for the most part, had simply shrugged and gone about its day. It was not arrogance. It was not ignorance. It was something the Council had never encountered before in all their thousands of years of conquest. It was the quiet confidence of a species that had survived everything it had ever thrown at itself, and had come out stronger every single time. They would learn this soon enough. They would learn it in fire and blood and shattered warships. But for now, they still believed they were dealing with just another young species that would break under pressure. They had no idea how wrong they were. Admiral Gregg had served in the Navy for 32 years. He had fought pirates near Jupiter. He had chased smugglers through the asteroid belt. He had once spent 3 weeks in a damaged shuttle with nothing but emergency rations and old country music to keep him company. In all that time, he had learned one important lesson. Panic was useless. Coffee was essential. So when his communications officer informed him that 800 alien warships had just entered the outer solar system, Greg took a long sip from his mug and studied the tactical display with calm interest. "That's a lot of ships," he observed. "Yes, sir. Our sensors count exactly 812 vessels, various classes. The largest ones are about twice the size of our carriers." Greg nodded slowly. The enemy fleet was impressive, he had to admit. Their ships had a certain elegance to them, all smooth curves and glowing energy fields. They looked like they had been designed by artists rather than engineers. Very pretty, probably very expensive. He turned to his executive officer, Commander Fuller. Was a practical woman who had grown up on a mining colony and had no patience for nonsense of any kind. She was also the best tactical mind Greg had ever worked with. "What do you think?" he asked her. Studied the display for a moment. "They're coming in fast and aggressive, standard intimidation approach. They want us to see them and be scared." "Are you scared?" "I'm annoyed. I was about to start my lunch break." Greg smiled. "Sorry about that. Should we wake up the president? Let him know what's happening." "Check the time. It's 3 in the morning in Washington. He's got that trade summit tomorrow, needs his rest." "Good point. We'll handle this ourselves then." Greg set down his coffee mug and straightened in his chair. "All stations, battle alert. Weapons free. Let's see what our new friends are made of." Across the carrier, relentless, alarms began to sound. Pilots ran to their fighters. Gunners took their positions. The massive rail guns that lined the ship's hull began to charge with a low hum that vibrated through the deck plates. On the other side of the solar system, of the hegemony watched his fleet approach Earth with supreme confidence. He was a warrior born and bred. His scales were marked with the scars of 100 battles. He had conquered 47 species in his career. This would be 48. Human vessels detected, his sensor officer reported. Approximately 60 ships, various sizes, they are moving to intercept. Laughed. It was a harsh sound like rocks grinding together. 60 ships against 800. They are either very brave or very stupid. Perhaps both. It does not matter. They will die just the same. Raised his hand to give the order to attack. He never finished the gesture. The first rail gun round hit his flagship at nearly 15% of the speed of light. At that velocity, even a relatively small projectile carried enough energy to punch through shields and armor like they were made of paper. The round entered through the front of the ship and exited through the back, leaving a hole the size of a small building. Before could even process what had happened, hundreds more rounds followed. They came from every direction, guided by targeting computers that could track a fly from 1,000,000 kilometers away. They did not miss. Human missiles joined the assault moments later, but these were not ordinary missiles. Each one carried an artificial intelligence that had been trained on thousands of years of human military history. They worked together, sharing information, adapting their tactics in real time. When the alien point defense systems tried to shoot them down, the missiles simply changed course and came in from different angles. And then there were the fighters. Lieutenant flew her fighter like she had been born in the cockpit. She was 24 years old, had grown up playing combat simulators, and had dreamed of this moment her entire life. As she dove through the alien formation, dodging energy beams and launching her own weapons, she was grinning so wide her cheeks hurt. "This is amazing," she shouted over the radio. "Did you see that? I just took out 2 of their cruisers with 1 torpedo spread." "Focus," her squadron leader replied. "We're in the middle of a battle." "I am focused. I'm also having the time of my life." Across the battlefield, the fleet was falling apart. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Others drifted helplessly, their engines destroyed, their crews abandoning ship in escape pods. The carefully planned formation had become chaos within minutes. Stood on the bridge of his damaged flagship watching his fleet die around him. He had never experienced anything like this. The humans were not fighting like any species he had ever encountered. They were too fast, too aggressive, too unpredictable. Every tactic he tried, they had already anticipated. Every retreat he ordered, they had already blocked. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "We outnumbered them more than 10 to 1. His tactical officer did not answer. He was too busy trying not to die. The battle lasted 11 minutes from the first shot to the last. When it was over, the fleet had been reduced to scattered debris and drifting wrecks. Human casualties were minimal. 3 fighters damaged, 1 shuttle lost to a lucky shot. No capital ships destroyed. Greg surveyed the aftermath from his command chair and felt a small sense of satisfaction. Not pride exactly, just the quiet pleasure of a job well done. "Get me a count of survivors," he ordered. "I want all escape pods collected and the wounded treated. These are prisoners of war now. We'll treat them properly." Raised an eyebrow. "Some of them tried to kill us about 10 minutes ago. And now they're beaten and scared. No point in being cruel about it." Greg picked up his coffee mug again. "Besides, I'm curious. I want to know what they thought was going to happen here." An hour later, sat in a surprisingly comfortable chair in a surprisingly pleasant room aboard the Relentless. A young human woman named, the same pilot who had destroyed several of his ships, had brought him a plate of something called barbecue. It smelled strange but not unpleasant. "Your species," managed to say through his shock, "fights without fear. How is this possible?" Greg sat across from him, looking more like a tired teacher than a military commander who had just won an impossible victory. Fear takes too much energy. We've got better things to do. But you face certain death. We had 800 ships. Did you, though? Greg smiled slightly. Here's the thing about humans. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've had plenty of time to get good at it. Stared at him. In all his conquests, he had never met a species so casual about war. It was unnatural. It was terrifying. And yet, as he took a bite of the barbecue and found it surprisingly delicious, he began to wonder if perhaps the council had made a terrible mistake. You should try the sauce, suggested helpfully. It's really good. Tried the sauce, she was right. It was really good. Somewhere, somehow, his entire understanding of the universe had just shifted, and he was not sure it would ever shift back. The emergency session of the Galactic Council began at 3 in the morning station time. This was unheard of. In 12,000 years of recorded history, the Council had never been called to meet in the middle of the night. There were protocols. There were traditions. There was basic courtesy. But High Arbiter had insisted, and when a High Arbiter insisted, people listened. 17 holographic projections filled the great chamber. Species leaders from across the Orion Arm, pulled from their beds and their duties, stared at with a mixture of confusion and irritation. The walls of the chamber had shifted to a pale gray, reflecting the uncertain mood of those present. "This had better be important," growled the representative, a female named who had taken over after capture. "I was in the middle of reviewing battle reports." "Battle reports from what battle?" asked the ambassador, a delicate being that resembled a floating cloud of light. "The war has barely begun." Stood in the center of the chamber, his stone-gray skin looking somehow paler than usual. His hands trembled slightly as he raised them for silence. "The war," he said slowly, "may already be over." A murmur of confusion rippled through the assembly. The ambassador, an elderly female named who had served on the council for 200 years, leaned forward with concern. "Explain yourself, Arbiter. What has happened?" Took a deep breath. In all his years of service, he had never felt so lost. "We sent 800 ships to attack the human. 800 of our finest vessels, crewed by our best warriors, armed with weapons that have crushed 47 species into submission." He paused. The chamber was completely silent. "They destroyed all of them, in 11 minutes. For a long moment no one spoke. The concept was too large to process. 800 ships, the greatest fleet the Council had ever assembled for a first strike, gone in less time than it took to eat a meal. "That is impossible," finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The humans are a young species. They have been spacefaring for only a few centuries. How could they possibly defeat a fleet of that size?" "I do not know." His voice cracked slightly. "Their weapons are unlike anything in our databases. Their tactics are unpredictable. Their pilots fly as if they have no concern for their own survival. And when we attempted to communicate with them afterward, do you know what they said?" Leaned forward. "What did they say, Arbiter?" "They asked if we wanted to grab lunch. I do not know what this means, but it terrifies me." The debate that followed lasted 14 hours. Every species had an opinion. The demanded an overwhelming response, the commitment of every ship in the combined fleet. The suggested that perhaps diplomacy should be attempted. The military advisors presented analysis after analysis, trying to explain how the battle had gone so wrong. But no one had answers. The humans had broken every rule of warfare that the Council understood. They had fought without fear, without hesitation, without mercy. And then, when it was over, they had treated their prisoners kindly and offered them food. It made no sense. Meanwhile, on Earth, life continued as normal. The news networks covered the battle for approximately 2 days. There were interviews with Admiral, who came across as humble and slightly embarrassed by all the attention. There were clips of the fighter pilots celebrating their victory, including one memorable video of Lieutenant doing a dance she had learned from a social media trend. But the public quickly grew bored. There was a championship game happening, and people were more interested in that than some aliens who had tried to invade and failed. A poll conducted in North America found that 63% of respondents were not very concerned about the Galactic War. Another 28% admitted they were not aware it was happening at all. Secretary of Defense held a press conference to address the situation. She stood behind a podium in a simple blue suit, looking exactly like what she was, a tired government official who had too much work to do. "The Council's attack has been repelled," she announced. "Our military performed exactly as expected. There were minimal casualties on our side, and we are currently caring for several thousand alien prisoners of war." A reporter raised her hand. "Secretary, what are your plans for the prisoners?" "We're treating them humanely, giving them medical care, food, and shelter, standard protocol." "What kind of food?" Pause. This was not a question she had expected. "Excuse me." "The aliens, what are you feeding them?" "I believe pizza has become popular, also something called barbecue." She shook her head slightly. "Is that really the most important question right now?" Another reporter jumped in. "Is it true that one of the alien commanders has requested cooking lessons?" Sighed. "I am not aware of that specific request, but if so, I'm sure we can accommodate him. Are there any questions about the actual war?" There were not many. The reporters seemed more interested in the aliens' reactions to human culture than in military strategy. One asked about the possibility of alien music. Another wanted to know if the prisoners had tried coffee yet. In the council chamber, the debate was finally winding down. No consensus had been reached. Some species wanted to continue the war with even greater force. Others were beginning to wonder if that was wise. A few had quietly begun calculating whether it might be possible to make peace before more of their ships were destroyed. Arbiter sat in his chair, exhausted beyond measure. He had spent his entire career believing that the Council was the supreme power in the galaxy, that younger species existed only to serve or to be crushed, that humanity, like all the others before them, would eventually kneel. But the humans had not knelt. They had barely even looked up. They had destroyed his fleet, captured his warriors, and then gone back to watching sports and arguing about restaurants. It was as if the entire war was nothing more than a minor inconvenience in their day. "Perhaps," said gently, "we underestimated them." "Perhaps we did," agreed. "The question is, what do we do now?" Had no answer. None of them did. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Galactic Council faced an enemy they did not understand. An enemy that could not be intimidated, could not be reasoned with in the usual ways, and apparently could not be defeated by force. An enemy that found the whole situation mildly amusing rather than terrifying. Looked at the tactical displays, at the reports of the battle, at the images of human pilots laughing and celebrating as they flew through the wreckage of his fleet. And for the first time in his very long life, he felt something he had only ever seen in the eyes of conquered species. He felt afraid. The walls of the chamber slowly shifted from gray to a deep, unsettling purple, the color of uncertainty, the color of doubt, the color of a civilization that was beginning to realize it might not be as powerful as it had always believed. And somewhere on Earth, finished her press conference, went back to her office, and started working on budget reports again. The aliens would do whatever the aliens were going to do. Her job was to make sure humanity was ready for it. She had a feeling they would be. After the disaster of the first attack, the Galactic Council decided to try a different approach. Direct military force had failed spectacularly. The humans were too strong, too fast, too unpredictable. But surely, the Council reasoned, they could not be immune to more subtle methods. Every species had weaknesses. Every civilization had cracks that could be exploited. It was simply a matter of finding them. The infiltration program was the most ambitious intelligence operation in Council history. Hundreds of agents from a dozen species were trained in human languages, human customs, and human psychology. They were given false identities, fake documents, and enough money to establish themselves in human society. Their mission was simple: spread fear, create division, destabilize from within. Agent of Intelligence was among the best. She had successfully brought down 3 governments and triggered 2 civil wars during her career. She was patient, intelligent, and completely ruthless. When she was assigned to infiltrate a human colony called New Chicago, she expected the mission to take about 6 months. It took 3 weeks for her to request asylum. Her final report was sent from a small apartment above a bakery where she had been living under the name Nancy. She had gotten a job decorating cakes. It had not been part of her plan, but the owner had needed help and had found herself volunteering before she could stop herself. "I do not understand these beings," she wrote in her report. "They are immune to despair. I showed them evidence of cosmic horrors that drive other species to madness. They responded by creating something called memes and laughing about it. I attempted to convince them that their government was corrupt and could not protect them. They informed me that they already knew their government was corrupt and invited me to join them in complaining about it over drinks." She paused in her writing, looking out the window at the busy street below. Humans walked past in all directions, going about their daily lives. Some were happy, some were sad, some were clearly having terrible days, but none of them seemed broken. None of them seemed ready to give up. "I tried to spread fear about the war," she continued. "They told me that they had been through worse. When I asked what could possibly be worse than an alien invasion, they showed me something called history class. I now understand why they do not panic. They have already survived things that would have destroyed any other species." She thought about her neighbors. There was an elderly man named Pete who brought her cookies every Sunday. There was a young couple who had helped her move furniture when she first arrived. There was a child who always waved at her through the window of the bakery. "These beings should be my enemies," she wrote. "Instead, they have become my friends. I find myself caring about I find myself hoping they win this war. I do not know when this happened. I do not know how, but I no longer wish to complete my mission. I am requesting permanent reassignment. The pastries here are excellent." Similar reports flooded in from across human space. The infiltration program, which had been expected to bring humanity to its knees within a year, had completely collapsed within a month. Agent of the hegemony had been sent to sabotage a military shipyard. Instead, he had been hired as a security consultant and was now helping to improve their defenses. He claimed in his report that the humans had simply offered him a better salary than the council was paying. Agent of the Collective had been tasked with hacking Earth's defense network. She had been caught within minutes, but instead of being imprisoned or executed, she had been offered a job in cybersecurity. She was now one of the highest-paid contractors in the sector and had no intention of returning home. Agent of the Dominion had attempted to pose as a human religious leader to spread panic about the end times. His followers had responded by starting a support group, organizing community meals, and generally making the neighborhood a better place. Had never been so confused in his entire life. Back on the council's capital station, Arbiter reviewed these reports with growing desperation. Every strategy had failed. Every plan had backfired. The humans seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to absorb anything thrown at them and come out stronger. "How do they do this?" he asked his advisors. "How do they turn our own agents against us?" The chief intelligence officer, a weary name, shook his head slowly. "It is their culture, Arbiter. They value kindness. They value connection. They welcome strangers. Our agents were not prepared for this. They expected hostility, suspicion, fear. Instead, they found community. Community is a weakness. We have always exploited it in other species. Not in humans, for them it is a strength. The more pressure we apply, the closer they come together. Pulled up a display showing human social patterns. Look at their history. They have faced plagues, wars, natural disasters. Every time they rebuild. Every time they adapt. They do not break because breaking is not in their nature. Stared at the display for a long moment. He thought about his own species, about the rigid hierarchies and careful traditions that held society together. Humans had none of that. They were chaotic, unpredictable, and apparently indestructible. There must be something, he said quietly, some vulnerability we have not discovered. Hesitated before answering. There may be one thing, Arbiter, but I do not think you will like it. Tell me. Their greatest weakness is that they care. They care about their families, their friends, their communities. They care about strangers they have never met. They even care about their enemies. Paused. Several of our captured warriors have reported receiving letters from human children, wishing them well and hoping they are being treated kindly. Felt a strange sensation in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as discomfort. And how is this a weakness? Because if we truly wanted to hurt them, we would have to hurt innocent people. We would have to target civilians, children, non-combatants. That is the only way to break a species that cares so deeply about others. The chamber was silent for a long moment. No, finally said. We will not do that. We are the Galactic Council. We are not monsters. Nodded slowly. Then I do not know how to defeat them, Arbiter, because everything else we have tried has only made them stronger. Meanwhile, on Earth, Agent had finished her shift at the bakery. She walked home through streets filled with people enjoying the evening. Someone had set up a small band on a corner, playing music that she had grown to love. Children ran past, laughing at some joke she did not understand but found herself smiling at anyway. Her communicator buzzed with a message from intelligence, demanding an explanation for her failure to complete her mission. She read it once, then deleted it. Tomorrow, she would learn how to make a new kind of pastry. Pete had promised to teach her his grandmother's recipe. It seemed more important than anything the council could ask of her. She had come to destroy humanity. Instead, humanity had saved her. And she was not the only one. 6 months after the declaration of war, a human diplomatic vessel arrived at the Galactic Council's capital station. It was not a warship, though the escort of battle cruisers that accompanied it made several council admirals quietly submit their resignations rather than face the possibility of fighting them. The ship was called the Olive Branch, a name that the council's translators struggled to understand. When they finally figured out that it was a symbol of peace, there was considerable confusion. Why would a species that had so thoroughly defeated them be offering peace? Ambassador Chris stepped off the ship with the easy confidence of a man who had once managed 30 teenagers through a field trip to the state capital. Before entering politics, he had been a high school history teacher in Ohio. He still thought of himself as a teacher, really. He was just teaching on a larger scale now. He was greeted by a formal delegation of 17 species representatives, each one more nervous than the last. Arbiter stood at the front, his stone-gray skin showing signs of strain that had not been there 6 months ago. The war had aged him considerably. Ambassador said stiffly, "Welcome to the council station." Chris smiled warmly and extended his hand. Stared at it for a moment before one of his aides whispered that this was a human greeting ritual involving physical contact. Reluctantly, shook the offered hand. "Thank you for having me," Chris said. "Is there somewhere we can sit down and talk? Maybe get some coffee? It was a long trip." Coffee, as it turned out, was not available on the station, but the council had prepared a selection of beverages from various member species. Chris tried several of them, declared one to be not bad, and settled into his chair like he was at a neighborhood barbecue rather than a diplomatic summit that would determine the fate of two civilizations. "So," he said, looking around at the assembled delegates. "I think we can all agree that this war thing hasn't really worked out for anyone." Arbiter bristled slightly. "We have not yet committed our full forces. The Council possesses resources that you cannot imagine." "I'm sure you do, and I'm sure you could make things very unpleasant for us if you really tried." Chris leaned back in his chair. "But here's the thing, we've been through worse. You've seen our history by now, right? The wars we've fought among ourselves, the disasters we've survived. An alien invasion is just another Tuesday for us." "You keep saying that word, Tuesday. What does it mean?" "It's a day of the week. The boring one, usually nothing special happens." Chris shrugged. "My point is, you can keep fighting us if you want. You'll lose more ships, more soldiers, more resources, and we'll just keep going about our lives. We'll watch our shows, eat our food, complain about our politicians. You'll become a minor inconvenience, a nuisance. Is that really what you want?" The chamber was silent. No one had ever spoken to the Council this way. No younger species had ever dared. The elderly ambassador leaned forward with careful interest. "What exactly are you proposing, Ambassador?" "Peace, simple as that. You leave us alone, we leave you alone. We go back to doing our own thing, you go back to doing yours." Chris paused. "But I think we can do better than that. I think we can actually help each other." "Help each other?" Of the hegemony looked skeptical. "What could you possibly offer us?" Chris reached into his bag and pulled out a small device. He placed it on the table and pressed a button. A holographic display appeared, showing images, videos, and sounds from human culture. "Entertainment," he said. "Stories, music, games. We've got thousands of years of content. Dramas that will make you cry, comedies that will make you laugh, action movies that will get your blood pumping. Whatever your species is into, we've probably got something for you." Stared at the display with confusion. "You would end a conflict by offering us your stories." "Stories are how we understand each other. They're how we share experiences across time and space. They're how we learn empathy, compassion, hope." Chris smiled. "Besides, once you've started watching a good series, you won't have time for war, trust me. Nobody does." The negotiation that followed was surprisingly brief. The Council had expected demands for territory, resources, political power. Instead, the humans asked only to be left alone and offered their culture in exchange. Some of the older delegates were suspicious. This had to be a trick. No species was this generous without an ulterior motive. But understood something that the others did not. She had lived for 200 years and had seen many civilizations rise and fall. The humans were not trying to conquer them through entertainment. They were trying to connect with them, to build bridges rather than walls. "I believe," she said slowly, "that we should accept this offer." The vote was not unanimous, but it was close enough. The Treaty of Peaceful Exchange was signed 3 days later. Human streaming services began expanding to 17 new species within the month. The effect was immediate and unexpected. Warriors, who had spent their entire lives training for battle, discovered a passion for human cooking shows. Scholars became obsessed with human mystery novels. Whose culture had always been focused on spiritual meditation, fell in love with human comedy and began developing something that looked suspiciously like a sense of humor. Within a year, the Galactic Council had largely stopped meeting, not because of any conflict, but because most delegates were too busy arguing about their favorite characters in various shows. A drama club formed to perform human plays. A chef opened the first restaurant, specializing in barbecue. Who had been released as part of the peace agreement, became a celebrity on human cooking networks. His show, Cooking Across Species, won multiple awards and was credited with improving human relations more than any diplomatic effort ever had. He still could not quite understand how he had gone from a feared warrior to a beloved television personality, but he was not complaining. Agent, formerly of intelligence, opened her own bakery in New Chicago. It became famous for its pastries, which combined human techniques with ingredients from across the galaxy. She never returned to her old life. She never wanted to. And Ambassador Chris went back to Ohio, where he resumed teaching history. His students found it hilarious that their teacher had negotiated peace with an alien civilization. He found it hilarious that they were more interested in the aliens' reactions to human memes than in any of the diplomatic details. On Earth, the war became a historical footnote. It was occasionally referenced in trivia games and documentary series, but most people had moved on to other concerns. Secretary of Defense retired to write her memoirs, which sold moderately well but were outperformed by Cookbook by a significant margin. Somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the former Galactic Council, a young clerk named was processing routine paperwork when she discovered a human concept called the weekend. 2 days out of every 7, dedicated to rest and personal enjoyment. No work allowed. She stared at her screen for a long time, trying to understand why no one in the entire history of the Council had ever thought of this. Then she put in a request to visit Earth. She had heard they had something called beaches, and she wanted to see what all the fuss was about. The galaxy had started a war expecting to crush humanity. Instead, humanity had changed the galaxy forever. Not through force, not through conquest, but through the simple power of stories, food, and the willingness to share both with anyone who was interested. It was, as Chris would later say, the most human victory of all. And somewhere in the vastness of space, on stations and planets and ships that had once been devoted to war, beings of 17 different species settled down with snacks, loaded up their favorite shows, and prepared for a night of entertainment. They had come to conquer Earth. Earth had conquered them instead. And nobody really minded.